Have you ever wondered what it feels like to lose everything and still be asked to open your heart again? Eleanor Whitmore was a widow with no home, no family, and nowhere to go. On a dusty trail westward, she met a rancher with 2 children who had lost their mother. In their eyes, she saw loneliness that mirrored her own. But then came a shocking proposition. I need a wife, and my children need a mother. Will you stay imagine being Eleanor? Do you risk your pride and step into a life built on duty instead of love? Or do you walk away and face an uncertain, empty road alone? Could you love children who weren't born to you, and carry the memory of a woman you'd never met but could never replace? If it were you, what choice would you make? Would you choose safety, or would you choose belonging? This is not just a story about survival. It's about second chances, about a family built not by blood, but by courage, kindness, and the daily choice to love. Stay with us, and let this story take you home. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next journey with us. When the stagecoach jolted to a halt in the dusty heart of the Nebraska plains, Eleanor Whitmore knew her old life had ended for good. The driver tossed her worn carpetbag onto the ground beside a weathered sign that read Fort Asheford, population 847. September heat shimmered off the earth, making her black dress cling uncomfortably to her skin. This is the end of the line. Ma'am, the driver called down, not unkind but without sympathy either. Next coach won't pass for another 2 weeks. Then, with a snap of the reins, the stage rattled off, leaving Eleanor standing alone in a swirl of dust. That small bag at her feet carried all she possessed now: 3 plain dresses, a handful of letters from her late husband, and the silver locket he had pressed into her palm before marching off to war. The locket was her only thing of value, yet she would never part with it. Inside was the only likeness she had of Thomas Whitmore. Her sister's harsh farewell echoed like a church bell that refused to quiet. We can't feed another mouth. Eleanor, you'll have to fend for yourself. After Thomas fell at Gettysburg, she had lived with Clara Dawson's family for 2 years. But when their crops failed, Clara's husband had declared that Eleanor was no more than an added burden. Cast out, she had bought the cheapest ticket west she could manage. Fort Asheford bustled in the afternoon sun. Soldiers in sweat-stained uniforms moved briskly between barracks. Wagons creaked under loads of supplies, families preparing to push farther into the frontier. Children darted under wagon wheels, shrieking with laughter despite the weight of survival that hung over the place. Everyone seemed to have a destination. Everyone but her. Eleanor stepped into the trading post, where the smell of leather, coffee, and tobacco filled the room. A gray-bearded storekeeper glanced up from his ledger. His eyes lingered on her black dress and the single bag she carried, and she could almost see the assumptions forming in his mind. I need work, Eleanor said carefully, steadying her voice, and a place to stay. The man scratched his chin. Not much for a woman on her own. Most folks want strong backs for the fields or soldiers for the garrison. Not. He stopped short, but the unfinished words hung heavy. Not widows with nothing but a needle and a prayer. I can cook, sew, read, and write. Eleanor offered. I've helped raise children. Maybe Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house could use you with the laundry, he said at last. Doesn't pay worth much, and she's choosy about who she hires. Thanking him, Eleanor stepped back into the sun. The heat felt sharper now, pressing down on her like a judgment. She sat on a bench near the water trough and opened her bag, fingers brushing the bundle of Thomas's letters. She drew out the last one, dated just days before his death. My dearest Eleanor, I dream of coming home to you and building the life we planned. I dream of children filling our kitchen with laughter, of you singing in your garden. Hold on to those dreams for us both. They are what keep me fighting. Her throat ached as she folded it carefully away. His dreams had died with him. What remained for her, she could not say. The rhythmic beat of hooves broke her thoughts. Eleanor looked up to see a tall man astride a bay horse riding toward the fort. Two children trailed behind him on smaller mounts. His clothes were sturdy but dusted from travel, his hat shading a face marked with lines of strain. Even at a distance, she sensed the weight he carried. The little girl, about 6, slid down quickly and ran to the trough, scooping water into her hands. The boy, older by 2 years, guided his sister with protective care. Both wore clothes that had once been fine but now bore the weary signs of the trail. The rider dismounted with an ease that spoke of long practice. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of cutting and gray eyes shadowed with grief. "Easy, Star," he murmured to the horse, his hand steady on the animal's neck. The girl wiped her dripping chin and looked up at him. "Papa, can we stay here tonight? I'm so tired of riding." His expression softened. "We'll see. Lydia, let me ask the folks at the fort first." Eleanor watched them with a hollow ache. Once, Thomas had spoken of the children they would raise together. Now she wondered if she would ever be more than a burden passed from one hand to another. The girl noticed her sitting on the bench and approached with fearless curiosity. "Are you waiting for someone?" Lydia asked, tilting her head. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "No, sweetheart, I'm not waiting for anyone. We're not waiting either," the child replied matter-of-factly. "We're searching for a new home," little Lydia Carter said with the innocent frankness only a child could manage. "Our old house got too sad after Mama went to heaven." The words struck Eleanor Whitmore like a blow to the chest. She blinked hard, fighting the sudden ache behind her eyes. This family carried wounds just as raw as her own. The man, clearly their father, looked over sharply when he heard his daughter speaking to a stranger. "Lydia, come away from the lady," he called in a deep, steady voice. "She doesn't need you troubling her." "She's not troubling me," Eleanor replied quickly, her voice soft but firm. "She's a lovely little girl." The man approached, boots thudding against the packed earth. Up close, his presence seemed to fill the space-broad shoulders, weathered face, gray eyes that looked as if they had witnessed far too much loss. He tipped his hat politely. "I apologize for her boldness, ma'am. Too many miles on the trail have worn down her manners." "No apology needed," Eleanor said. "Children shouldn't be scolded for kindness." She reminded me that it still exists in this world. Something in her tone made him study her more carefully. She saw his gaze flick over her morning dress, the single carpet bag at her feet, the weary way she sat as though she had nowhere left to go. "I'm Nathaniel Carter," he said, extending a hand. "These are my children, Lydia and Samuel, Eleanor Whitmore." She answered, taking his hand. His grip was strong and roughened from years of work, yet there was a steadiness in it that made her feel oddly safe. "Are you passing through Fort Asheford, Mrs. Whitmore?" Nathaniel asked. Heat crept into Eleanor's cheeks. "I suppose you could say I'm between situations at the moment. His eyes, storm gray, piercing, rested on her face as though he could read beyond her polite words to the truth she guarded. Eleanor looked away, unsettled. Nathaniel turned to his son. "Samuel, take your sister to the trading post. We need coffee and some hardtack for the trail." The boy, carrying himself with a gravity far beyond his 8 years, nodded and reached for Lydia's hand. Eleanor watched them walk off together. Samuel's protective arm around his sister spoke volumes. He already bore the burden of a man, though still a child. When they were gone, Nathaniel turned back to her. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "this territory doesn't give us the luxury of flowery speeches. I'll speak plain. You look like a woman who has run out of options, and I'm a man with a problem that only someone like you might be able to solve." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "I'm not sure I understand you." "Mr. Carter, my children have been without a mother for 8 months, he explained, his voice low. "I've done my best to manage the ranch and raise them, but it isn't enough. They need more than food and a roof. They need softness. Someone to braid Lydia's hair, someone to help Samuel with his reading, things I cannot give." Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. "Are you offering me work?" Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, watching his children across the yard as they inspected a barrel of apples outside the store. Finally, he shook his head. "No, I'm offering more than that." His gaze returned to her. "I need a wife, Mrs. Whitmore, and unless I miss my guess, you need a home." The bench beneath Eleanor seemed to tilt, her world thrown off balance. "A wife," she whispered. "Mr. Carter, you don't know anything about me." He eased down onto the bench beside her, leaving proper space but close enough that she could feel the strength in his presence. "I know you're a widow. Your dress says as much. I know you're alone, judging by that one bag and the way you sit as though you've nowhere to turn. And I know you have kindness in you, because I heard how you spoke to my daughter." Her hands twisted in her lap. "Those are such small things to base so large a decision on." "Sometimes," Nathaniel replied steadily. "The smallest things reveal more than all the grand speeches in the world. My late wife, Rose, used to say a person's true character showed in the first 5 minutes in how they treated children, or animals, or those who couldn't offer them anything in return." The mention of his wife made Eleanor's breath catch. "You must have loved her deeply." "I did," he said simply, "but love doesn't always last as long as we hope. Rose died giving birth to what would have been our 3rd child. I lost them both in the same night." Her throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you," he murmured, "but I don't tell you this for sympathy. I want you to understand. What I'm offering isn't about replacing what I had with Rose. It's about building something new for my children, and perhaps for you as well, across the yard." Lydia's laughter rang out as Samuel lifted her high enough to stroke their horse's mane. Eleanor's chest tightened with longing so fierce it surprised her. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked. "A practical arrangement," Nathaniel answered. "You would come to my ranch as my wife. You'd help raise my children, keep the household, and in return you'd have a home, security, and the protection of marriage. Nothing more would be demanded of you than you're willing to give." His eyes held hers with quiet honesty. "I'm not searching for romance. I'm searching for a partner who will help me give my children the family they deserve." His plainness should have eased her. Instead, it left her hollow. Thomas's letters had been filled with passion and devotion, dreams of laughter and love. Could she really accept a life built on necessity alone? Yet, what choice remained? Work for widows was scarce in a place where women alone were eyed with suspicion, or worse. She forced herself to ask, "Where is your ranch?" "About a day's ride northwest, near Willow Creek," he said. "Good land, plenty of water, and a house Rose designed herself. The cattle do well enough. I hire extra hands when needed." Eleanor tried to picture it a house built by another woman's hand, children who still carried their mother's memory, a man who offered security but not love. What would become of her if the arrangement failed? Nathaniel's expression grew solemn. "If it doesn't work, we'll face that bridge when we come to it. But I'm not a man who makes choices lightly. If I ask you to be my wife, it's because I believe you're someone who finishes what she starts." Eleanor searched his face, uncertain. "How can you possibly know that about me? Because you're here." He answered, "When your family turned you out, you didn't give up. You boarded a coach west, not knowing what you'd find. That takes courage, Mrs. Whitmore, more than most people ever muster." For the first time since Thomas's death, someone had called her brave. Her sister had called her foolish. The driver who left her here had called her desperate. But Nathaniel Carter looked at her as though she was strong. Her heart pounded. This man was asking her to step into a life that wasn't hers, to mother children who weren't born of her body, to build something uncertain on land that belonged to another woman's memory. Yet when she thought of the lonely room waiting at the boarding house, and the long, bleak road that stretched beyond it, she realized this might be the only chance left to belong anywhere at all. "I suppose we'd just have to face that bridge when it came," Nathaniel said quietly. "But Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not a man who takes decisions lightly. If I'm asking you to be my wife, it's because I believe you're the kind of person who sees a promise through." His words carried a weight that made Eleanor Whitmore lift her eyes to study him more closely. There was no flattery in his tone, no attempt at charm, only a steady conviction. "How can you possibly know that about me?" she asked. Her voice hushed. "Because you're here," Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "You could have given up when your kin turned you away. You could have scraped by some other way, taken charity, or hidden yourself back east. Instead, you bought a ticket west with nothing certain ahead of you. That takes grit, Mrs. Whitmore, more than most folks give you credit for." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. Her sister Clara had called her reckless. The stage driver had muttered desperate. Yet here was a man who looked at the same act and named it courage. The shift in perspective made her chest tighten. "The children," she said carefully. "They've already lost one mother. What if they never accept me? Lydia already does," Nathaniel replied with a quiet assurance. "And Samuel will, in time. He only needs to see you're not here to erase Rose's memory. You're here to help them move forward," as if summoned. Lydia came darting back across the yard, Samuel trailing behind her with the solemn patience of an older brother. Her cheeks were flushed pink with excitement. "Papa," she called. "The man at the store said there's going to be a dance tonight. Can we stay? Please, can we go?" Nathaniel looked torn. "Lydia, we need to get back to the ranch. The men are expecting us. Please." "Papa," the little girl insisted, tugging at his sleeve. "We haven't danced since she went to heaven. I remember how you used to spin her around the kitchen while Samuel and I watched." Eleanor saw something flicker across Nathaniel's face. pain swift and sharp, gone before most would notice. But she noticed. This was a man who carried grief in his bones. "I think a dance sounds like a fine idea," Eleanor heard herself say softly. "If your father agrees, of course." Lydia's eyes widened. "Would you dance with us?" "Mrs. What's your name again?" "Whitmore," Eleanor said gently. Then she smiled. "But you may call me Eleanor if you'd like." "Would you dance with us?" Miss Eleanor Lydia asked hopefully. Eleanor glanced at Nathaniel, who was watching closely, his expression unreadable. She swallowed. "I haven't danced in a very long time," she admitted. "I might have forgotten how. I can teach you," Lydia announced with childlike certainty. "Mama taught me. I remember all the steps." Samuel, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Lydia, you can't just invite strangers to dance with us." "She's not a stranger," Lydia said, her little chin lifting stubbornly. "She's going to be our new mama." Eleanor froze, her breath catching. Nathaniel's face went pale, and she realized the children had heard more of their earlier conversation than either of them had intended. "Lydia," Nathaniel said carefully, "Mrs. Whitmore and I were only talking. Nothing has been decided." But Lydia would not be stopped. She stepped closer to Eleanor and slipped her small hand into hers with the fearless trust of a child. "You look sad, like Papa does. Mama always said sad people need extra hugs and dancing to feel better." Eleanor felt something inside her shift, some wall she had carefully built since Thomas's death cracking under the weight of such pure acceptance. This child was offering her something no adult had in 2 long years a place to belong. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "She was," Samuel said, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. His voice carried the steady echo of his father's. "She told us families aren't only the ones you're born with. Sometimes they're the people you choose to love." Eleanor turned her gaze to Nathaniel and found her own astonishment mirrored in his gray eyes. These children, who had lost so much, were teaching them both about hope and second chances. Nathaniel's voice dropped low. "So, what do you say, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Would you be willing to take a chance on us?" Eleanor thought of the cold little room waiting for her at the boarding house, of the endless uncertainty that lay ahead if she tried to find work alone, of the loneliness that had haunted her since Thomas fell at Gettysburg. Then she looked at Lydia's bright, eager face, at Samuel's guarded but hopeful eyes, and at Nathaniel, this man who carried his sorrow like a soldier but still stood tall. "Yes," she said, the words stronger than she expected. "Yes, I think I would." Lydia let out a delighted shriek that made nearby soldiers turn to see what the fuss was about. Samuel smiled a real smile this time, the first Eleanor had seen from him. And Nathaniel's shoulders eased, as though for the first time in months the weight had shifted. "Well, then," Nathaniel said, rising to his feet and holding out his hand, "we ought to find the preacher and make this proper before the dance tonight." Eleanor placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding. As he helped her to her feet, she felt the world tilt once more, but this time it didn't feel like falling. It felt like the first step toward something entirely new. As they walked toward the small chapel at Fort Asheford, with Lydia skipping along beside them and Samuel carrying Eleanor's carpet bag without being asked, she felt something stir deep inside her chest. For the first time in 2 years, the ache of widowhood did not feel like the end of her story. It felt like the beginning of something uncharted. Weeks later, the wagon creaked and jolted over another stretch of rocky ground. Eleanor gripped the wooden seat to keep from sliding into Nathaniel Carter's shoulder. 3 weeks had passed since their quiet wedding, and now the Nebraska prairie stretched before them, golden and endless beneath the crisp October sky. It wasn't the ruts and bumps of the trail that made Eleanor's stomach tighten. It was the weight of knowing she was about to step into the home of a woman she could never replace. "Look," Miss Eleanor Lydia cried from the back of the wagon, her small hand pointing eagerly ahead. "That's our house." Eleanor followed the child's finger and caught her breath. Nestled in a green fold of land where tall cottonwoods lined a winding stream, a white, 2-story farmhouse rose like something from a painting. Red barns stood proudly nearby, and beyond them, cattle grazed across pastures that seemed to roll on without end. Smoke curled from the chimney, and flower boxes brightened the windows with a last burst of autumn color. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, though the word hardly seemed enough. Nathaniel's hands tightened on the reins. "Rose spent months sketching out every detail," he said quietly. "She made me promise to build it just so." There was reverence in the way he spoke his late wife's name. Eleanor felt like an interloper, about to walk into a house shaped by another woman's vision. How could she ever hope to measure up as they drew nearer? Eleanor noticed a man working by the barn. He was tall and lean, his silver hair catching the sunlight. Setting aside his tools, he walked toward them with the steady stride of someone sure of his place in the world. "That's Silas Turner," Samuel explained from the wagon bed. "He's been helping Papa since before I was born. He even helped build the house." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the porch. Nathaniel swung down and reached for Eleanor's hand. After the long ride, her legs felt weak, and she was grateful for his steady grip at her elbow. Silas approached with a wide smile that deepened the lines at the corners of his weathered eyes. "Well now, Nathaniel," he said warmly, "are you going to introduce me to your bride, or keep her a mystery, Silas Turner? Meet Mrs. Eleanor Carter," Nathaniel said with deliberate formality. "Eleanor, Silas runs this place better than I do." Her cheeks flushed at hearing her new name spoken aloud. "Mrs. Eleanor Carter." It still felt foreign on her tongue, yet strangely solid. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Silas said, tipping his hat. "These young ones haven't stopped talking about their new mama, have they?" Eleanor asked, glancing at Lydia, who was already climbing down from the wagon. "Oh, yes," Silas chuckled. "Lydia's been making me practice waltzing steps. Says she wants to be sure she can show you proper when there's a party. And young Samuel's been devouring every book in the house, determined to impress you with his learning." Eleanor's heart lifted at the thought, though anxiety tugged at her as well. What if she failed to meet their hopes? Nathaniel was already unloading her trunk from the wagon, his movements brisk and efficient. Eleanor found herself wondering what passed behind that quiet, guarded expression of his. In the weeks since their vows, he had been unfailingly polite, always considerate. Yet he still felt like a man she knew only in outline, his true self hidden beneath layers of reserve. "Come on." "Miss Eleanor," Lydia said, tugging her hand, "I want to show you everything." The little girl pulled her eagerly toward the porch, chattering all the way. But as Eleanor set her foot on the first step, her body grew heavy, as though every board carried the weight of memory. The front door opened into a parlor that stole her breath. Hand-sewn quilts draped across the chairs, A mantel crowded with family photographs stretched above the hearth. Lace curtains framed windows that overlooked the valley, and a vase of fresh wildflowers stood proudly on a polished table. Mama picked every color. Lydia said proudly. She always said a house ought to feel like a hug the moment you walk inside. Eleanor swallowed past the lump rising in her throat. Rose Carter's presence lingered in every corner of this room. It was not just a house. It was the living memory of another woman's love. How could Eleanor ever belong here? "Let me show you the kitchen," Samuel offered, his voice quieter than his sister's. "Papa said you might want to change things if they don't suit you." The kitchen was spacious and carefully arranged. A cast-iron stove stood in the center. Shelves lined neatly with jars of preserved fruit and vegetables. A small box on the counter held recipe cards, the top ones written in a graceful hand that could only have been Rose's. "I don't believe anything here needs changing," Eleanor said softly, running her hand over the smooth wooden counter. "Your mother had excellent taste." Samuel studied her, his dark eyes older than his years. "It's all right if you want to move things. Papa told us you might need to make the house feel like yours, too." The thoughtfulness of his words startled her. At just 8 years old, he seemed to carry an understanding well beyond his age. "Thank you," Eleanor replied gently, "but I think I'll leave it as it is for now. Your mother created something very special here. At that." Lydia tugged eagerly at her skirt. "Come see my room. I cleaned it all myself." Eleanor let herself be led deeper into the house, surrounded by the laughter and voices of children who were beginning to claim her as their own. Still, the question lingered in her mind with every step she took. Could she make a place for herself in a home that still carried the soul of another woman? They climbed the stairs to the second floor, Lydia running ahead, her braids bouncing with each step. She flung open the door to a cheerful bedroom painted in shades of yellow and white. Sunlight poured through the windows onto shelves lined with wooden dolls and well-worn picture books. A little rocking chair sat by the window, as if waiting for its occupant to curl up with a story. "Papa made all my dolls," Lydia announced proudly, "and Mama stitched all their dresses. Do you know how to sew?" "Miss Eleanor, I do," Eleanor answered, touched by the eagerness in the girl's eyes. "Perhaps we could make some new dresses together." "Really?" Lydia gasped, her whole face lighting up. "Could we use blue ribbons? Blue's my favorite color now." "I think that sounds just perfect," Eleanor said. The thought of working side by side with Lydia on such a project warmed her. It would be a small way to build a bridge into this child's heart. At the doorway, Samuel appeared, quiet and steady. "Would you like to see my room, too?" Eleanor followed him next door. His space was decorated in earthy greens and browns, more serious than his sister's. On the dresser, a neat row of carved animals stood as if guarding the room. Eleanor noticed a small unfinished horse on his desk, its shape already detailed with surprising precision. "Did you carve this yourself?" she asked, lifting the little figure gently. Samuel gave a shy nod. "Papa's been showing me how. He says my hands are good for detail." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said sincerely. "You've got real talent." A faint blush rose in Samuel's cheeks, and Eleanor realized how much a word of praise meant to him. These children had been motherless for 8 long months. They were hungry for encouragement, the sort that only a mother could give. Behind them came Nathaniel's voice, steady and calm. "Let me show you the master bedroom." Eleanor turned to see him standing in the hall, her trunk balanced easily on his shoulder. He led the way into a larger room at the end of the hall. Windows opened toward the creek, and a heavy oak bed dominated the space, covered with one of Rose Carter's handmade quilts. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the dresser. Framed photographs lined its surface wedding portraits. Family pictures capturing moments of laughter and life long gone. "I can move those, if they trouble you," Nathaniel said quietly, his gaze following hers. "No," Eleanor said quickly. "They belong here. The children should see their mother every day." Something softened in his face, a flicker of gratitude. "That's very generous of you." "It isn't generosity," Eleanor replied. "It's truth. You can't build a new life by pretending the old one never happened." Nathaniel set her trunk near the wardrobe. "There's space enough for your things." Rose always said this room was too big for just one person. Eleanor opened her trunk and carefully began to unpack. Her few dresses hung loosely in the large wardrobe, dwarfed by the neatly arranged clothes Rose had left behind. She tried not to let the sense of inadequacy sink too deep. From the doorway, Lydia piped up, "Mama had fancy dresses, but I like yours too. Miss Eleanor, they look comfortable." Eleanor chuckled softly at the child's diplomatic phrasing. Her clothes were plain, built for work rather than for show. "Thank you, Lydia," she said with a smile. "Why don't you two run along and help Silas with the chores?" Nathaniel suggested gently. "Let Eleanor get settled in." Once the children's footsteps faded down the hall, silence settled over the room. Eleanor continued arranging her things while Nathaniel stood at the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "The children seem glad to have you here," he said finally. "They're wonderful," Eleanor replied honestly. "You and Rose raised them well." "Rose did most of the raising," Nathaniel admitted. "I was always tied up with the ranch. She used to tell me I'd need to be both mother and father if anything ever happened to her. I never thought." His voice trailed away, heavy with memory. Eleanor's heart ached for him. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said softly. He turned from the window, his gray eyes catching hers. "I hope you don't regret this choice, Eleanor. I know it isn't the life you dreamed of as a young girl." Her throat tightened as she thought of Thomas, of the passionate letters, the bright plans for a life together that would never come. None of us lived the exact life we dreamed of. "Nathaniel," she said gently, "but that doesn't mean we can't build something good with what's left." A sudden commotion outside drew their eyes to the window. Lydia was chasing a runaway chicken across the yard while Samuel tried to herd it back toward the coop. Silas Turner stood nearby, laughing heartily as he tried to help. "I should go lend a hand," Nathaniel muttered, but he didn't move. "Give them a moment," Eleanor said with a faint smile. "Children need to learn how to solve things themselves, together." They watched as Lydia finally scooped up the chicken, her face triumphant. Samuel praised her efforts while Silas clapped them both on the back. "You're going to be good for them," Nathaniel said quietly. "I hope so," Eleanor whispered. "I want to be." By evening, she found herself in Rose's kitchen, preparing her first meal as mistress of the Carter household. She had pulled beef and vegetables from the cellar, following one of the handwritten cards from Rose's recipe box. The stew simmered on the stove, filling the house with a rich, comforting aroma. Lydia sat at the table, peeling potatoes with eager hands as she chattered about her day. Samuel was outside with Nathaniel, learning to milk the cows through the window. Eleanor watched father and son working together, their heads bent close in easy rhythm. Miss Eleanor Lydia's voice pulled her back. "Yes, darling." The little girl's expression had grown serious. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" The question struck Eleanor like a blow. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because Mama said she would stay forever, too. But then she went to heaven, and sometimes people leave even when they don't want to." Eleanor set down her spoon and knelt beside the child, taking Lydia's small hands into her own. "I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen," Eleanor Whitmore said softly, her hands still wrapped around Lydia's small fingers. "But I can promise that I'm not planning to leave. I want to be part of your family for as long as you'll have me." The child searched her face with the fierce seriousness only children seemed capable of, as if weighing her words on a scale invisible to the grown. Whatever she found there satisfied her, because she gave a solemn little nod and returned to peeling potatoes as though no heavier question had been asked. Later that night, after the dishes were stacked and the children tucked beneath their quilts, Eleanor sat on the porch beside Nathaniel Carter. The October air smelled of wood smoke, the sound of lowing cattle drifting across the fields. "Thank you," Nathaniel said quietly. For what Eleanor asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. "For how you answered Lydia. For not rushing to change everything the moment you stepped into this house. For understanding about the photographs. This is their home." "Nathaniel," Eleanor replied, "I'm the newcomer here. It's my place to fit in, not to remake what already belongs to them." Still, he studied her in the moonlight. Not every woman would be so gracious about living in another woman's shadow. Eleanor thought for a long while, gazing out across the dark valley. "I don't see it as living in Rose's shadow. I see it as being trusted to carry forward something beautiful that she began." Nathaniel's eyes softened, and he shook his head slightly. "You're not what I expected." "Eleanor Carter, and what exactly did you expect?" she asked with a faint smile. "Someone more desperate, I suppose? Someone willing to take any chance without thinking twice about what it meant?" "Oh, I am desperate," Eleanor admitted with a trace of humor. "And grateful, too. But I'm also a woman with her own thoughts and feelings. I hope that doesn't trouble you." "No," Nathaniel said, his voice low, "not a problem at all." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the fragile stirrings of peace. She had no illusions that life here would be simple. But sitting beside her new husband, with his children asleep safely under the same roof, she allowed herself to hope that maybe she had found a place she could belong. That fragile calm shattered hours later with a scream that tore through the pre-dawn dark. Eleanor bolted upright in bed, heart hammering like a trapped bird. Beside her, Nathaniel was already on his feet, pulling on his boots, rifle in hand. Moonlight poured through the window, cutting his features into grim lines. Another cry rose from the valley, not human this time, but the panicked bellow of cattle under attack. "Stay with the children," he ordered, voice clipped with urgency. "Silas and I will handle this." But Eleanor was already reaching for her wrapper, her bare feet hitting the cold floor. "What's happening, wolves?" Nathaniel muttered, checking the chamber of his rifle with the quick precision of a man who'd done it too many times. "They've been coming closer lately." Through the glass, Eleanor caught sight of dark forms moving against the horizon. The cattle were huddled tight in the pasture, their fear a living sound that prickled her skin. Lanterns bobbed in the distance as ranch hands poured from the bunkhouse. Papa Lydia's frightened voice carried from the hallway, followed by the sound of quick, bare feet. Eleanor threw open the door to find both children in the corridor, Samuel gripping his sister's hand, his face pale but determined. "It's all right," Eleanor said, gathering them close. "Your papa and Silas will take care of everything." "Is it wolves?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though it trembled at the edges, before she could answer. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. He dropped to one knee and pulled both children into his arms. "I need you to be brave tonight. Stay with Eleanor. Can you do that?" Lydia nodded, but Samuel's jaw set with resolve. "I could help. Papa, I'm old enough now. You're old enough to protect your sister and Eleanor," Nathaniel said firmly. "That's the most important job of all." Samuel straightened his small shoulders, pride flickering across his face at being entrusted with such responsibility. "I won't let anything happen to them," he promised. Nathaniel's eyes met Eleanor's over the children's heads, steady and intense. "Keep them away from the windows, and if it comes to it, there's another rifle in the wardrobe." The thought of needing to fire a weapon made Eleanor's stomach knot, but she nodded. "Be careful, Nathaniel." He touched her shoulder briefly, then was gone, his boots pounding down the stairs from the window. Eleanor watched him sprint toward the barn where Silas Turner was already tightening the saddle on a restless horse. Ranch hands mounted up, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the night as they rode out toward the pasture. "Miss Eleanor," Lydia whispered, her voice muffled against Eleanor's nightgown, "will the wolves hurt Papa?" "Your father is clever and careful," Eleanor assured her, though her own pulse raced. "He's dealt with wolves before, gathering both children." She led them to the parlor. She lit every oil lamp she could find until the room glowed warmly, pushing back the shadows that seemed to creep in from every crack. Samuel hovered close to the window but kept his promise, not letting Lydia stray. Outside, the sounds of shouting men and frantic cattle filled the air, punctuated by the distant, bone-chilling howl of wolves. Eleanor sat with the children huddled against her, praying silently that the night would not take from this family more than it already had. Outside, the night roared with noise, the clash of men's voices, the pounding of hooves, and the frantic cries of cattle breaking against the valley walls. From the sounds, Eleanor Whitmore guessed the wolf pack had split, circling the herd from different directions to throw the men into confusion. Nathaniel Carter had planted himself at the front window, his small face set in an expression that looked far too old for his years. "I can see the lanterns, moving toward the north pasture," he reported like a young soldier given news from the field. "Samuel, step away from the window," Eleanor urged, recalling Nathaniel's stern warning. "But I need to watch for Papa," the boy insisted, his fists clenched. What if he needs help? Her heart softened at his determination. But she knew Nathaniel needed freedom to fight without worrying about his family. "The best way to help your father right now," she said gently, "is to do exactly what he asked of us, stay safe inside. That's how we give him strength." A new sound broke through the chaos, the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing across the valley. Lydia Carter whimpered, pressing herself close against Eleanor's side. Samuel's knuckles went white where he gripped the window ledge. "They're shooting the wolves," Eleanor explained, keeping her voice calm, steady, as though she were simply naming chores for the day. "That's good news. It means your father and the men are handling it. More shots rang out, then the thunder of horses at full gallop. Slowly, the wild chorus of the cattle began to settle, their terror easing. "Tell us a story, Miss Eleanor," Lydia pleaded suddenly, "like Mama used to, when we were afraid." Eleanor's mind went blank. What tale could possibly soothe children while their father risked his life against predators in the dark? Then she remembered nights long ago when her own mother had calmed her during storms with simple stories. "All right," she said, settling the children against her on either side. "Once upon a time, there was a brave knight who lived in a great castle with his 2 children, a prince and a princess. Like Papa and us," Lydia whispered, "very much like your Papa and you." Eleanor replied, "This knight had a solemn duty. He protected everyone in his kingdom, every person, every animal from the wild creatures that prowled in the forest." As Eleanor spun the tale, she drew clear lines between her knight and Nathaniel, painting a picture of courage that the children could cling to. She told of how the knight outwitted the forest beasts with cleverness and bravery, and how he always returned safely to his children, who waited faithfully at the castle gate. Samuel, who had been hovering near the window, gradually drifted closer and sat beside her. Lydia leaned in too, her breathing calmer now. Eleanor's words wrapped them in a fragile shield, even as muffled gunfire still echoed across the hills. The noises outside began to fade. Fewer shouts, fewer shots, until the cattle's cries quieted to uneasy murmurs. Eleanor let her story stretch, ending with the knight and his men feasting after victory, their kingdom safe once more. "Did the creatures ever come back?" Samuel asked, his brow furrowed. "Sometimes," Eleanor answered honestly, "but the knight was always ready, and he always won." Before she could say more, the front door banged open. All 3 of them jumped. "Eleanor, children, everything all right in here?" Nathaniel Carter's voice rang through the parlor. Papa Lydia squealed, darting across the room to fling herself into his arms. Relief washed over Eleanor like a wave as she saw him framed in the doorway, his clothes dusty, his hair damp with sweat, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to him but alive, whole. Samuel moved quickly too, trying to keep his composure but clinging to his father all the same. Nathaniel drew both children close, then looked up to meet Eleanor's gaze over their heads. His eyes carried exhaustion but also a silent gratitude. "How bad was it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "We lost 3 head," he admitted, voice heavy, "but we brought down 4 of the wolves. The rest slunk back to the hills." Behind him, Silas Turner stepped inside, his face tired but satisfied. "Evening, Mrs. Carter. Sorry for all the ruckus. Is everyone safe?" Eleanor asked at once. "All the men are fine," Silas assured her. "Young Pete got a scratch. Nothing more. Those wolves were bold, though. Came right up to the fence instead of picking off strays." Nathaniel bent to look into his children's faces, his hand resting gently on Samuel's shoulder. "You 2 were very brave tonight. I'm proud of you for looking after Eleanor and doing as I asked. Miss Eleanor told us a story about a knight," Lydia announced proudly. "The knight was just like you, Papa, and he always won." Nathaniel's eyes flicked to Eleanor again, and she saw in them not only thanks, but something deeper, a recognition that she had stepped into her place beside him, steady and sure in the storm. "Well," Nathaniel said, his voice weary but warm, "this night could use some strong coffee. If there's any left in the pot, I'll make some." Eleanor offered quickly, grateful to put her hands to work. "In the kitchen," She lit another lamp and measured coffee grounds with slightly trembling fingers, the delayed weight of fear catching up with her now that the danger had passed. The pot began to bubble, filling the air with its rich, earthy scent. Through the window, Eleanor saw the first pale wash of dawn stretch across the horizon, chasing away the shadows of the night. A new day was beginning, and, though the threat had been real, the family had faced it together. For the first time, Eleanor felt less like a stranger in this house and more like someone who belonged within its walls. That night had taught Eleanor Whitmore something vital about what it meant to belong in this family. It wasn't only about the quiet joys of hearth and home. It was about standing steady during storms, facing danger as part of something larger than herself. Nathaniel Carter appeared in the kitchen doorway, freshly changed, his dark hair still damp where he had splashed water on his face. The children finally fell asleep on the parlor sofa, he said, his voice softer than usual. I couldn't bring myself to send them back upstairs. That's all right, Eleanor replied as she poured coffee into 2 mugs. They need to feel safe tonight, more than they need to sleep in their own beds. Nathaniel wrapped his hands around the cup she offered him, breathing in the steam. Silas said he heard you telling them a story, even over the gunfire. Thank you for that. They needed something to hold on to besides fear, she explained. When I was little, storms used to terrify me until my mother taught me that stories could carry you somewhere else, far from the thunder. Nathaniel studied her in the glow of the lamp. You've got good instincts with them. Rose used to say being a mother wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about making children feel secure, even when the world was anything but. The comparison to Rose might have stung, but instead Eleanor felt it like a benediction, not a rivalry, but a continuity. She was carrying on something Rose had begun. Do you think the wolves will come back? She asked. Not soon, Nathaniel replied. We gave them a reason to stay away. But Eleanor. He hesitated, his gaze steady on hers. This won't be the last time we face danger out here. There'll be droughts, storms, maybe rustlers or worse. Ranch life is never easy. Eleanor didn't look away. I never expected it to be easy, but I also never expected to have people worth protecting. Something shifted in his eyes then. A wall lowering, a guardedness melting away. You truly mean to stay, don't you? Even knowing all that it means, I mean to stay, Eleanor said firmly. These children need a mother who won't vanish when things get hard, and you need a wife who can stand beside you when trouble comes. He was quiet for a long while, sipping his coffee. At last, he murmured. Rose always said courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Eleanor's throat tightened. Your wife was wise. Nathaniel's eyes softened. She was, and I believe she would have liked you very much. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes at the unexpected blessing. For Nathaniel to think Rose would have approved felt like receiving a gift from beyond the grave. The first rays of dawn began to spill over the plains, painting the Nebraska sky in the shades of rose and gold. Husband and wife sat together at the table, already planning the day, checking cattle, mending fences, tending to chores. But something was different. Eleanor no longer felt like a guest in this household. She was a Carter, now wife, mother, defender of this place. From the parlor came the sound of stirring children. Lydia's sleepy voice drifted into the kitchen. Miss Eleanor, is it morning? Yes, sweetheart, Eleanor called back, her heart swelling. It's morning. and everything is safe." She rose to rouse them for the day when the sudden sound of hoofbeats shattered the calm. The rhythm was sharp, deliberate, carrying the weight of trouble. Eleanor dropped the shirt she had been mending and hurried to the frost-laced window. 3 riders approached across the frozen ground. Their coats were dark, their pace measured. At the front was a man with a sharp beard and piercing blue eyes. Even at a distance, Eleanor recognized him from Nathaniel's rare, tightly spoken stories, Robert Alden. The man Nathaniel had mentioned only once, his jaw tightening with old anger. "Nathaniel," Eleanor called, her voice urgent. "We have visitors." Her husband appeared almost instantly from his study, ledger still open on the desk behind him. The moment his eyes fell on the riders, his face hardened into stone. "Take the children upstairs," he said quietly. But it was too late. Lydia and Samuel had already pressed their faces to the parlor window, curiosity gleaming. "Papa, who are those men?" Lydia asked, her breath fogging the glass. Nathaniel's hand moved instinctively to Eleanor's shoulder, a gesture outwardly calm but carrying both protection and possession. His voice was quiet, edged with iron. Robert Alden, Rose's former fiancé. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Nathaniel had shared pieces of his past with Rose, but never the full story of why Alden looked toward this land with the hunger of a man who believed it should have been his. The riders halted in front of the porch. Eleanor could see now that the 2 flanking Alden were strangers. One wore a sheriff's badge, his face weathered and tired but not unkind. The other was dressed in a black suit, holding a leather portfolio that suggested official business, the kind that carried weight. "Mr. Carter," the man in the suit called, his voice formal, cutting through the cold air. "Mrs. Carter, we need to speak with you on a matter of official concern." Nathaniel's jaw flexed, but he squared his shoulders and stepped toward the door. Eleanor followed, her heart hammering, dread pooling low in her stomach. The 3 men stood in a line at the bottom of the porch steps, their horses snorting clouds into the December chill. Robert Alden's lips curved into a false smile as his eyes swept over Nathaniel, and then lingered far too long on Eleanor. "Nathaniel," he said, voice smooth with false friendliness. "Good to see you again, and this must be the new Mrs. Carter." His gaze slid over Eleanor like a weight, sharp and assessing. It made her skin crawl. Robert Alden's eyes swept over Eleanor Whitmore, lingering with calculated disdain on her plain dress, her calloused hands, her lack of fine jewelry or polish. It was clear he meant to strip her down with nothing more than a look. "What do you want?" Robert Nathaniel Carter asked bluntly, his voice tight with impatience. "Now. Now." The man in the black suit interrupted smoothly, stepping forward with the air of authority. "Let us keep things civil. I am Judge Lyman Pierce, from the Territorial Court in Omaha. Mr. Alden has brought certain concerns to my attention regarding the welfare of your children." Eleanor's stomach lurched. "The children? Yes, ma'am," Judge Pierce continued, his tone heavy with false reasonableness that sounded more like ice than concern. "Mr. Alden has questioned whether this household provides a suitable environment for young Lydia and Samuel." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. What kind of questions, he asked, his voice dangerously low. Robert Alden stepped forward, arranging his face into a mask of concern. "Nathaniel, you know I only want what is best for Rose's children, but surely you must see how it looks, taking in a stranger from off the street and naming her their mother. People are bound to question your judgment." Eleanor felt a small hand slip into hers. She glanced down and saw Samuel at her side, his expression taut with worry. When had he come down the stairs behind him? Lydia hovered in the doorway, her wide blue eyes full of confusion and dawning fear. "These are my children," Nathaniel said firmly, "and Eleanor is my wife. That's no one's business but ours." "Actually," Judge Pierce replied, pulling a folder from his leather portfolio, "when the welfare of minors is at stake, it becomes the community's business. Mr. Alden has presented troubling information about Mrs. Carter's background." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with shame and fury. What sort of information? Robert Alden's smile was cold and satisfied. The kind that shows you were cast out by your own family. Abandoned. "Miss Whitmore, excuse me. Mrs. Carter. They could not afford to keep you. Now tell me, what kind of mother can a woman be, if even her own kin judged her too great a burden?" The words landed like blows. Reopening wounds, Eleanor thought, had scabbed over. Every rejection, every whispered slight since leaving her sister's farm came rushing back. Worst of all, Lydia and Samuel were standing there, hearing it all. "That's enough." Nathaniel's voice cracked like a whip, so sharp that even the sheriff shifted uneasily where he stood. But Alden wasn't finished. He pressed forward, eyes glinting. "And then there is the matter of this marriage. Everyone knows it was an arrangement of convenience. A lonely widower and a desperate woman striking a bargain. Is that really the kind of home Rose's children deserve?" Before Nathaniel could reply, Lydia stepped from the doorway, her chin lifted in stubborn defiance that reminded Eleanor so much of her father it made her throat ache. "Miss Eleanor's the best mama we could ever have." "Is she?" Alden asked, crouching to Lydia's level with false gentleness. "Or is she simply someone your papa hired to watch you, because he was too busy with his cattle to do it himself?" "That's not true," Samuel burst out, his voice breaking with emotion. "She reads to us every night. She helps me with my arithmetic. She teaches Lydia how to braid her hair. She never gets angry when we have bad dreams." Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes at Samuel's passionate defense, but Judge Pierce remained unmoved. Children often become attached to anyone who shows them kindness. That doesn't prove the arrangement is truly in their best interests. "What are you proposing?" Nathaniel asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Judge Pierce straightened, his voice formal. "Mr. Alden has petitioned the court to be granted guardianship of Lydia and Samuel. As Rose Carter's former fiancé and a respected member of the community, he has a legitimate claim of concern for their welfare." The words hit Eleanor like a sledgehammer. Guardianship. They meant to take her children she loved as fiercely as if they were her own blood. On what grounds? Nathaniel demanded. "On the grounds that your marriage is a sham," Alden replied smoothly, "that you brought an unfit woman into your home to raise children who deserve better. Rose promised herself to me, Nathaniel. Had she lived, those children would have been mine through marriage. They should have been mine. But Rose didn't marry you." Eleanor found her voice at last, her fury giving it strength. She chose Nathaniel. She chose this family, this ranch. She trusted her husband to raise her children. Alden's eyes narrowed with anger at being contradicted. Rose was young and impressionable. Given more time, she might have come to see her mistake. "Don't you dare speak for my wife," Nathaniel growled, his hand pressing protectively at Eleanor's back. Rose knew her own mind. She chose me, and she chose this family over whatever it was you offered." Judge Pierce raised a hand, trying to restore calm. "Please, Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, I must ask a few questions to assess suitability." Eleanor lifted her chin, summoning every scrap of courage she had. Then asked, "What experience do you have raising children? I cared for my sister's little ones for 2 years." Eleanor said steadily, "And I have been mother to Lydia and Samuel these past 4 months, but you have no children of your own." Pierce pressed. The reminder struck like a blade, tearing open grief she thought she had buried with Thomas. "No," she admitted softly, "and your family found you too burdensome to support." Pierce continued, "My sister's farm failed." Eleanor answered, her cheeks burning, but her eyes locked on his. "Their choice to turn me out reflects their hardship, not my worth. Or perhaps," Alden interjected smoothly, "it shows that even your own kin judged you unfit. If your family would not keep you, why should strangers entrust you with their most precious treasure because she loves us?" Lydia cried suddenly, her small voice rising with startling force. "And we love her back. That's what makes a family." Her words rang through the room, silencing even the judge for a moment. Eleanor Whitmore knelt down, pulling Lydia Carter into her arms. The little girl's small frame shook with fear. Her face pressed against Eleanor's shoulder, over her head. Eleanor saw Samuel Carter standing stiff and pale, his fists clenched tight, his young face twisted with confusion and anger. "Judge Pierce," Eleanor said, her voice trembling at first but gaining steadiness with every word, "you want to know if I am fit to be their mother. Let me tell you what I have learned in these past months with them. I have learned that Lydia wakes in the night when storms roll over these hills. So I sit with her until the thunder passes. I have learned that Samuel can calculate sums faster than I can keep up with. But that reading doesn't come easily to him, so we practice together every evening by lamplight. And I have learned that both children still weep sometimes for their first mother, and I hold them, because grief is part of love." She rose slowly, one hand on Lydia's shoulder, the other extended toward Samuel. He stepped forward immediately, gripping her hand. "I have learned," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger, "that being a mother is not about blood ties or a ring on your finger. It is about showing up every single day, no matter how hard. It is about placing their needs before your own comfort. It is about teaching them that they are worthy of love and protection, no matter what harsh words the world throws at them." Her words struck the quiet courtyard with force. Even Judge Pierce shifted slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. "You want to know why my sister's family sent me away?" Eleanor pressed on, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because they saw me as one more mouth to feed, one more burden they could not carry. But Nathaniel saw me as a woman of worth, capable of giving and receiving love. And these children she squeezed their hands see me as someone who will not abandon them, who will never decide they are too much trouble to keep." Turning, she fixed her eyes on Robert Alden. "You may have money, a polished name, and a stack of papers, but I hold something far more powerful. I hold the daily choice to love these children, and they make the choice to love me back. That is no business arrangement, Mr. Alden. That is a family." Silence followed, broken only by the rustle of wind through the bare cottonwoods along the creek. Even the sheriff shifted uncomfortably, clearly uneasy with the errand he had been pulled into. Judge Pierce cleared his throat at last. "Mrs. Carter," Your devotion is clear, but passion alone does not decide what is legally best." Then what does Samuel ask? His small voice steady despite the tears shining in his eyes. "Because Miss Eleanor, our Mama Eleanor, she makes us feel safe. She makes us feel wanted. Isn't that what children need most?" Eleanor's throat ached with pride at his courage, even as dread coiled inside her. What if the judge's heart was not moved? Judge Pierce looked at each of them. Lydia, Samuel, Eleanor, then Nathaniel, clearly shaken by the strength of their unity. At last, he spoke. "I need time to weigh all sides. Mr. Alden, your petition is recorded. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, your position is noted. I will return in 1 week with my decision." With that, he turned sharply on his heel. Alden's glare lingered for a long, poisonous moment before he mounted his horse. The 3 men rode off, their figures shrinking against the winter horizon. The moment they were gone, Nathaniel's arms wrapped tightly around Eleanor from behind, pulling her and the children into his embrace. For a moment, the 4 of them stood pressed together, united against the world. But even as Eleanor rested her cheek against Nathaniel's chest, even as she felt Lydia's hand grip her skirt and Samuel's small frame press into her side, dread gnawed at her heart. What if the judge took them away? What if this fragile happiness slipped like water through her fingers? Later that night, long after the children had cried themselves to sleep, Eleanor sat in Rose's rocking chair, hers now, though she still thought of it as borrowed. Lydia lay curled in her lap like a sleeping kitten, seeking comfort in dreams. Samuel had collapsed on the sofa, clutching his whittling knife as though he could guard them all, even in sleep. The fire had burned low when Nathaniel's quiet voice broke the silence. "We could run." Eleanor looked up sharply. He was standing near the hearth, his face set but his eyes shadowed. Run where she whispered. "This is your land, Nathaniel, your life's work. You cannot abandon it because of Robert Alden's schemes." "I can," he said simply, "if it means keeping my family together." The word family sent warmth through Eleanor's chest, despite the fear pressing in from every side. "I have friends in Oregon Territory," Nathaniel continued. "We could start over there." Eleanor glanced at Samuel's small body sprawled across the sofa, his face older than his 8 years, carrying burdens no child should bear. Then she looked down at Lydia, clinging to her in sleep as if she might vanish. And what life would that be for them, Eleanor asked softly, always looking over their shoulders, wondering if someone will come to take them away. They've lost enough already. Nathaniel, they need roots, not more running. He moved to kneel beside her, his weathered hands closing around hers where they rested on Lydia's back. His gray eyes searched hers. "Then, what do you suggest? Because I will not let that man take my children. I don't care what documents he waves in our faces." Eleanor had been turning the question over in her mind all night, worrying it like a puzzle she refused to leave unsolved. At last, she drew a steadying breath. "We fight smart," Eleanor Whitmore said, her voice calm though her heart was pounding. How Nathaniel Carter asked, weary but resolute. Before Eleanor could answer, a firm knock at the door startled them both. It was far too late for casual visitors. Nathaniel reached for the rifle, leaning near the hearth. But Eleanor rose first, carefully easing Lydia onto the warm cushion of the rocking chair. "I'll get it," she said firmly. "If it's trouble, I'd rather face it head on." She pulled the door open to find Silas Turner standing there, hat in hand, his weathered face solemn. Behind him stood three more familiar figures: George Whitfield from the East Range, Caleb Foster from across Willow Creek, and old Ezra Collins, whose homestead bordered their southern pastures. "Mrs. Carter," Silas said softly, "sorry to trouble you so late, but word travels fast. We heard what happened today. We wanted you to know where we stand." Eleanor stepped back and invited them into the kitchen. Nathaniel soon joined, and the men crowded around the heavy wooden table where so many family meals had been shared. The space felt too gentle for their rugged boots and grim faces, but the resolve in their eyes was clear. "That Alden fellow came by my place this afternoon," George Whitfield began, "not bothering with pleasantries, asking questions about your marriage, about whether I thought it was proper, wanted to know if I reckoned those children were well cared for." Eleanor's cheeks burned. "And what did you tell him?" George's craggy face broke into a rare grin. "Told him he could take his questions and shove them where the sun don't shine. Pardon me, ma'am. Anyone with eyes can see Lydia and Samuel are thriving here." Caleb Foster nodded. "My wife saw Lydia at the store just last week, chattering away about the dress you made her and how you're teaching her to read. Said she hadn't seen the girl so lively since Rose passed." Ezra Collins leaned forward, his voice steady, "And Samuel's been coming around asking me about woodworking. Says his new mama thinks he's got real skill with his hands and wants to encourage it. Rose was a good woman, God rest her, but she never did understand that boy's itch to carve and build." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes at these unexpected testimonies. "Thank you," she whispered, "but if Judge Pierce has already made up his mind, I fear it won't matter." "That's where you're wrong," Silas said, leaning forward. "Out here, judges listen to the voices of the community. They have to. If enough of us speak for you, it'll carry weight." Nathaniel, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. "What are you suggesting?" "A petition," George replied. "Every family in this territory willing to vouch for you and Eleanor as parents. We put it in writing. Hand it to the judge when he returns, and not just the men." Caleb added quickly, "Our wives' voices matter more than ours in this. Folks will listen to mothers about who's fit to raise children. My Martha said she'd be the first to sign." For the first time that night, hope flickered in Eleanor's chest. "Do you truly think it could help?" "It can't hurt," Ezra said pragmatically, "but there's something else you need to hear." The kitchen grew still. "Alden's been spreading stories," Ezra continued, lowering his voice, "telling folks your marriage isn't real in all the ways that count, that it's a business deal, not a home, saying you sleep in separate rooms, barely speak to one another, that the children are raised more by a hired hand than a mother." Heat rushed to Eleanor's face. The private details of her relationship with Nathaniel were no one's concern. Yet she could see the truth in Ezra's warning. By keeping their bond so guarded, they had left room for Alden's lies to take root. Nathaniel's eyes went storm dark. What kind of rumors? Silas shifted uncomfortably. The kind that question whether you two are husband and wife in truth or only on paper. And if people believe that, it makes Alden's case stronger. Eleanor looked across the table at Nathaniel. His gaze met hers, and she saw her own realization mirrored there. They had both been so careful, so determined to honor their practical arrangement, that they had left the world to wonder if there was any real affection between them at all. "We can change that," Nathaniel said slowly, his gray eyes locked on hers. "If you're willing." Eleanor understood instantly. To counter Alden's poison, They would have to show their marriage for what it had become more than convenience, more than necessity. They would have to show their community that they were partners, husband and wife in truth. "I'm willing," she answered softly, and for the first time since the judge's visit, something warm stirred between them, a quiet promise. The men rose after that, promising to begin circulating the petition at first light. As they left, the night air rushed into the kitchen, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the faint sound of cattle lowing in the distance. When the door closed, Eleanor leaned against the table, exhaustion pressing on her. Nathaniel moved to her side, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that was both protective and tentative. "We'll show them," he said, "not just with words, but with how we live. This family is ours, and no judge, no petition, and no Robert Alden will tear it apart." Eleanor nodded, her heart steadied by his quiet conviction. Whatever storm awaited them, they would face it together side by side as husband and wife. After the neighbors left that night, silence filled the Carter kitchen. Eleanor Whitmore and Nathaniel Carter sat across from each other, the lamplight soft between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. At last, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "what I mentioned about showing them we're truly married, I need you to know. I'd never force you into anything you weren't ready for." She studied him in the glow of the lamp, seeing not only the steady rancher who had offered her shelter months ago, but the man who had grown to respect her, trust her, and quietly love her. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "I think we've both been so cautious, so afraid of presuming too much, that we've ended up presuming too little." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Her breath caught, but she pressed forward. "I mean that, somewhere along the way, this stopped being just an arrangement. You, Lydia, Samuel, you've become my family in every way that matters. And if I'm honest, my feelings for you have grown into something much deeper than gratitude or duty." Nathaniel's eyes widened, hope breaking across his features like dawn. "Eleanor, I've felt the same, but I held back. I was afraid if I spoke it aloud, you'd think I was trying to change what we agreed to. And what if," she whispered, her heart pounding. "I want those terms to change." Nathaniel reached across the table, his calloused fingers tracing the back of her hands with surprising tenderness. "I love you," he said simply, "not just for the way you've cared for the children, but for who you are, your strength, your gentleness, the way you hum while you mend clothes, the way you listen to Lydia's endless chatter as though it were gospel, the way you've given Samuel confidence in himself. You've brought warmth into this house again, Eleanor, and I love you for it." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I thought my heart was buried with Thomas, but you've shown me that love is not a single flame. It can grow, it can multiply. There's room for what I had and for what I've found now." Nathaniel rose and came around the table, drawing her into his arms. His kiss was tender, filled with all the feelings they had both been holding back. Eleanor melted into him, letting herself believe for the first time that she truly belonged here, not as a necessity, but as a wife and partner. When they parted, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens with Alden and the judge, we'll face it together as a real family. As a real family," she echoed, her voice steady. The following days brought a wave of support that left Eleanor breathless. Abigail Whitfield gathered the women, moving from cabin to cabin, collecting signatures and written statements testifying to Eleanor's devotion and the children's happiness. George Whitfield, Caleb Foster, and Ezra Collins did the same among the men, spreading word that the Carters were building something worth protecting. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Nathaniel quietly began to let down the walls they had kept so carefully built. They held hands as they walked across the yard. Nathaniel kissed her cheek when he came in from branding cattle. Eleanor set her hand on his shoulder as she poured his coffee. Simple gestures, yet powerful ones, acts of affection the neighbors could see with their own eyes. Lydia bloomed in this new warmth. "I always knew you belonged together," she announced with the certainty of a child who believed love could fix anything. Samuel, though quieter, began to relax. The lines of worry eased from his young face as if he finally trusted that this family was no longer fragile, but rooted deep enough to withstand storms. The morning, Judge Pierce was due to return. Eleanor stood before the bedroom mirror, carefully pinning her hair. She wore her best wool dress, deep blue, the one that made her eyes shine brighter. At her throat rested the silver locket that once held Thomas's picture returned to her by Lydia the night before. "For luck, Mama Eleanor," Lydia had said with solemn eyes. "So you'll remember that love never runs out. It just grows bigger. Now." As Eleanor touched the cool metal, she felt the truth of those words. Her love for Thomas had shaped her past, but her love for Nathaniel and the children shaped her present and her future. Her heart was not divided, it was expanded. "You ready?" Nathaniel asked from the doorway, freshly shaven and dressed in his best suit. "Ready," she replied, slipping her hand into his offered arm. Together. They descended the stairs, the sound of their steps echoing in the quiet house. They were not strangers bound by necessity anymore. They were husband and wife, prepared to face judgment as one. At exactly noon, Judge Lyman Pierce rode over the rise, his black horse moving with deliberate pace, but he was not alone. A dozen wagons followed, carrying families from across the territory, neighbors, ranchers, friends come to stand witness. From the kitchen window, Eleanor watched in awe as women in calico skirts and men in broad hats climbed down from their wagons. Children ran across the yard, their laughter mingling with the nervous murmurs of adults. It was not just a hearing now. It was the community itself gathering, ready to decide whether the Carter family would stand or fall. Eleanor tightened her hand on Nathaniel's arm. Whatever came, they would meet it together with love, with courage, and with the strength of a family forged not by blood, but by choice. From the kitchen window, Eleanor Whitmore watched wagons rolling into the yard one after another, their beds loaded not only with neighbors but with baskets of food, quilts, and determination. It looked less like a legal hearing and more like a gathering of kinfolk come to defend their own. "Looks like half the territory showed up," Nathaniel Carter murmured beside her, his rough hand sliding into hers, squeezing gently. At her other side, Lydia Carter pressed her small face to the glass, fogging it with her breath. "Why are so many people here?" Mama Eleanor. Eleanor bent down, brushing a strand of blonde hair back from the child's damp cheek. "Because they care about our family," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "Because they want to make sure we stay together." Samuel Carter appeared then, pale but steady. "What if it isn't enough? What if the judge still says we have to go with Mr. Alden?" Eleanor knelt so her eyes met his. Resting her hands firmly on his thin shoulders, she said, Then we'll find another way to fight. But Samuel, I want you to remember this no matter what any man in a black suit says. You and Lydia will always be mine in my heart. That can never be taken away. Outside. Judge Lyman Pierce dismounted near the porch, his black suit cut in a sharp figure against the backdrop of anxious neighbors. In Alden's wagon, Robert Alden sat stiff-backed, displeasure written plain on his face at the crowd gathered against him. The first to approach was Abigail Whitfield, carrying a thick folder pressed to her chest. Behind her came a line of women Eleanor recognized from church pews and the general store faces that once offered polite smiles, now lit with fierce determination. They marched like guardian angels to the Carter's porch. "Mrs. Carter," Abigail called, her voice strong. "We have something for the judge." Eleanor opened the door to find her porch crowded. George Whitfield stood hat in hand beside his wife. Caleb Foster balanced his youngest daughter on his shoulders, and old Ezra Collins leaned heavy on his cane but carried an expression that could cut stone. Judge Pierce blinked at the sight, clearly unsettled. "What is the meaning of this?" His formal tone carried irritation, as though he'd expected a quiet proceeding, not a public reckoning. "This," Abigail declared, thrusting the folder forward, "is a petition signed by 43 families. Everyone testifies to Eleanor Carter's character as a wife and mother." The judge took the folder reluctantly. He flipped through the signatures, his brows lifting higher at the handwritten notes praising Eleanor's care of the children, her kindness, her steady presence on the ranch. "And furthermore," George added, his voice carrying across the yard, "we've come to speak on behalf of the Carters. If you're going to decide something that affects all of us, then the community ought to have its say." Alden climbed down from his wagon, face flushed with anger. "This is highly irregular. Judge Pierce, you cannot allow yourself to be swayed by a mob." "Careful, Alden," Ezra Collins cut in, his gravelly voice sharp as an axe. "You're speaking of our wives and neighbors. You don't insult our people and walk away easy." Eleanor felt Nathaniel's arm slip around her waist. Standing together on the porch with Lydia and Samuel tucked at their sides, they looked out at the sea of familiar faces and realized they were not alone. These people had chosen to stand with them. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. "While I appreciate the enthusiasm of this community, matters of custody are decided by legal precedent and by the best interests of the children, not by popular opinion." "Then let's talk about the children's interests," Abigail Whitfield countered. She turned toward Lydia and Samuel, beckoning them gently. "Lydia, sweetheart, would you like to tell the judge how you feel about your new mama?" The little girl stepped forward, chin high with the same courage that had charmed Eleanor from the very beginning. "Judge, sir, Mama Eleanor makes the best apple pie in the whole territory. She reads to me every single night, and when I have bad dreams, she sits with me until they go away. She teaches me things, and she listens when I talk, and she never makes me feel like I'm too much trouble." Pierce's stern face softened just a fraction. He turned to Samuel. "And you, young man." Samuel's small shoulders squared. His voice, though young, carried steady conviction. "Sir, Mama Eleanor helps me with my reading, even when I get the words wrong. She says I'm smart with numbers, and she makes me believe it. She doesn't try to replace our first mama, she just loves us the way we are. Mr. Alden doesn't even know us." Gasps rippled quietly through the gathered crowd. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, pride and fear warring in her chest. The words of these children, pure and uncoached, carried more weight than any neighbor's petition ever could. A hush fell over the yard. Even Judge Pierce seemed at a loss for words, staring at the children who had just spoken more truth than all the lawyers and officials in Omaha combined. Eleanor stood taller, her hand resting gently on Lydia's shoulder, Samuel close at her side. Whatever the judge decided, she knew this moment had sealed something unbreakable. Their family was bound not by law, not by signatures, but by love that no man could unravel. The yard was silent after Judge Lyman Pierce finished speaking, but only for a heartbeat. Then the cheer went up, rolling across the prairie like thunder. Neighbors clapped one another on the back, women wiped away tears, and children laughed with the relief of knowing their world was safe. On the porch, Eleanor Whitmore Carter swayed as though her knees might give way, but Nathaniel Carter's arm circled her waist, steadying her. At their sides, Lydia and Samuel pressed close, clinging tight to their parents as if afraid someone might try to snatch them away. "Your petition is denied," the judge had said. "These children belong with their father and stepmother, in the home that love has built." The words echoed in Eleanor's mind, rich with the weight of finality. They had won. For now, the family she had thought she might lose was safe. Yet even as her heart soared, her eyes caught Robert Alden's face in the crowd, pale with fury, humiliated before the neighbors he had hoped to sway. Alden mounted his horse with a stiff jaw and a glare that promised this battle wasn't over. A chill chased down Eleanor's spine, but she pressed closer to Nathaniel. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would meet them together. That night, after neighbors filled their home with food, congratulations, and prayers of thanksgiving, Eleanor sat rocking Lydia in the parlor while Samuel dozed against Nathaniel's side. She thought of the words Judge Pierce had spoken, that she had chosen this family and this life for the first time in years. She felt the truth of it settle deep within her soul. She wasn't merely surviving anymore. She belonged. 6 months later, spring sunlight spilled across the Carter ranch. The kitchen smelled of warm bread as Eleanor hummed softly, her hands dusted with flour. The silver locket at her throat gleamed in the morning light, no longer just a relic of loss but a symbol of resilience. Mama Eleanor Lydia's bright voice carried through the open window. "Come see what Samuel made for you." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. There stood Samuel, grinning proudly, holding a wooden jewelry box so finely carved it looked as though it belonged in a shop window. Tiny roses twined across the lid, and when he lifted it open, a soft-lined compartment waited inside. Eleanor gasped. "Samuel, this is extraordinary. However did you manage something so detailed?" The boy's cheeks flushed pink. "I worked on it in the evenings after lessons. Papa helped with the hinges, but the carving, that's all mine." Just then, Nathaniel strode from the barn, reins in hand, the sun catching the easy smile on his face. At 34, he looked younger than when Eleanor had first met him at Fort Asheford, worry lines softened by peace and purpose. He studied Samuel's creation, whistling low. "Son, this is museum work. You've a gift in your hands." Eleanor opened the box once more. Carefully, she unclasped her locket, the one Thomas had given her long ago, and placed it inside. "Lydia, will you help me?" The little girl solemnly lifted the locket into the box. Eleanor watched with a full heart as past and present nestled together, a treasure kept safe. yet no longer heavy with sorrow. Later that morning, Silas Turner approached from the road with a letter in hand. "Mail came through Fort Asheford," he said, tipping his hat. "This one's from back east." Eleanor's breath caught as she recognized her sister's handwriting. Clara Dawson's letters had grown more frequent since word of Eleanor's stand against Alden had somehow traveled eastward. Each one carried more respect than the last. Surprising Eleanor still. "What does Aunt Clara say?" Lydia asked, her blue eyes bright with curiosity. Eleanor unfolded the page, her eyes scanning the lines. Surprise softened her expression. "She's congratulating us on our harvest. She writes that she's proud of me, proud that I've built a life here, and she hopes one day she might come west to meet her new niece and nephew." Nathaniel's brows rose. "That's quite a change from the sister who turned you out." Eleanor folded the letter thoughtfully. "People change when their fortunes improve, but I don't need her approval anymore. If she comes, it will only be because I believe it would add something good to our lives." That evening, the family gathered on the porch steps. Lydia nestled at Eleanor's side, Samuel sitting upright with his whittling knife tucked into his belt. Nathaniel's hand warm around hers. "Tell us again," Lydia begged. "Tell us how you and Papa decided to get married." It had become her favorite story, a bedtime request Eleanor never refused. Smiling softly, she began. "Well, your Papa was the bravest man I ever met. He trusted a stranger with the most precious treasures of his heart." "And your Mama," Nathaniel added, voice low with affection, "was the bravest woman I'd ever known. Willing to start again, with no promise except hope. But you did find happiness," Lydia said with certainty. "Lots and lots of it." Eleanor's eyes swept across her family, the man whose steady love had grown into passion. The children whose laughter had healed her grief. The home that now carried her touch beside Rose's memory. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, "we found more happiness than I ever dared dream." As the Nebraska sun dipped low, painting the valley in gold and green, the Carters sat together, the sounds of cattle lowing in distant pastures and cottonwoods whispering in the breeze. Eleanor Whitmore, once a cast-off widow, was now Eleanor Carter, beloved wife, cherished mother, and keeper of a home built not by convenience, but by choice and unyielding love. And she knew, as she held Samuel's jewelry box close, that their journey wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The story of Eleanor, Nathaniel, and the children reminds us of a truth many of us discover only later in life. Family is not always the one we are born into. It is the one we choose, and the one that chooses us back. At 60 or 70, we look back and see how love has carried us through storms, losses, and seasons of change. What endures is not perfection, nor even blood ties, but the small, faithful acts of care sitting beside someone in the dark, teaching a child to read, sharing bread at the table. This tale speaks to the courage of starting over. Eleanor had been cast aside, unwanted by her own kin. Yet she found a new home by daring to say yes, yes to risk, yes to vulnerability, yes to a love that asked her to step forward even when she was afraid. For those of us who have known grief, or who wonder if it's too late to find belonging, this story whispers hope it is never too late. Love can return in unexpected ways, and sometimes the family that sustains us is the one we choose day by day. Thank you, dear friends, for spending your time with us and walking through this story of love, loss, and second chances. If Eleanor's journey touched your heart, please help us share it with others, like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these frontier stories alive, and we look forward to welcoming you back for the next Tale by the Fire.